This will be multiple parts just because of the complexity of the situation, but I want to share our story in a way as a way to like raise awareness for other parents or to be a support person. Um, and what happened to my son was very rare from my understanding, but the things leading up to it were not that rare. So, as you may or may not know, I had twins that were born at 24 weeks, 1 pound 7 ounces, 1 pound 6 ounces. And there is, they were born via C-section, and my son actually had an easier birth than my daughter. On day 3 of life, he did not have a brain bleed. And what they call brain bleeds in NICU life is intraventricular hemorrhage. And so that is something that all micropreemies especially are at risk for, just because in babies, the brain tissue is tissue paper thin, like so thin. And so any of the tiniest movement can cause a bleed. There are very specific things that you can do to help prevent bleeds. Obviously, birth trauma is a huge thing. But then, not lifting their head or their legs above their heads, keeping them midline, things like that, like very specific nursing care things that can be done. I could tell a very long story that would probably take me, 10 videos to explain. But long story short, on day 3 of life, my son did not have a brain bleed. And he was checked on day 3 because he had like symptoms of a bleed, but they did not find any signs of IVH on day 3. From my own research and my understanding, a bleed after 3 to 4 days of life is pretty rare. I think it's like 10% of babies get a bleed. So when we found out that he did not have a bleed, we were very, very, very happy and just like ecstatic because the outcomes of brain bleeds in babies that young, especially, as you get up into the higher grade bleeds, are not great. And I'm actually doing my thesis for my master's nursing program on IVH, and so I have been doing a lot of research on it recently. And the outcomes are not always terrible. Sometimes they can be, these babies can live normal lives, but overall the outcomes are not great. The survivability is very high, but the actual like what their life looks like and their brain function, it's not studied really well, and it's just tons of unknowns. And so these babies are at high risk for things like CP, developmental delay, neurodevelopmental disorders, sensory disorders, personality disorders, things like that. And I'll get into the rest in part 2.